If Mother Nature destroys your home, would disaster beat you to the bank? Florida and Puerto Rico are now under states of emergency as they brace for Hurricane Irma, while Texans are reeling from the property damage caused by Hurricane Harvey, which could stretch up to $40 billion, according to estimates from CoreLogic. 70% of home damages caused by Harvey's flooding will not be covered by insurance, meanwhile. Joining us right now is Ramsey Solutions financial expert and author of Retire Inspired, Chris Hogan. And Chris, it is good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very, very much.
Yeah, and we're happy to have you in studio because we always talk to you when you're somewhere else. This is an important story. How can people financially prepare for a national or natural disaster?
Well, I think the first thing, Maria, is you got to plan. And by planning, I mean, make sure you have the right kinds of insurances in place and coverages and understanding what those coverages are going to do. For example, homeowners insurance will only cover wind damage. It doesn't cover the flood. And so you really need to be aware, what do we need to have in place to protect our family?
That's a really good point.
And we just heard earlier on the show that 85% of those that have been affected by Hurricane Harvey didn't have flood insurance.
Right.
So what do they do now? It's the federal government's flood insurance program. We're hoping that that gets re-upped here. Is that where they lean? Is that what they lean on, or what do they do?
The first step for them is really going to be to reach out to their mortgage company or their mortgage servicer to find out, as well as their insurance company. If they didn't have coverage, now it's going to become one of those major loss type things where they're going to have to walk through the paperwork to figure out what is the government going to be able to do to help, but more importantly, what are they going to have to do for themselves?
You know, for a lot of these people, the property insurance is so expensive, and if you're living in a hurricane-prone area in North Carolina coast or Florida coast, and a lot of people say, I'm just going to take my chances because I can't pay the thousands and thousands of dollars that it costs to insure this place. What's someone to do when those coverages are so expensive?
Well, I think the big thing you do is reach out and make sure you get with an insurance professional. I mean, if you're talking about thousands of dollars in coverage, you're talking about hundreds of thousands for your home. And so it's really that loss mitigation type mentality where we got to have risk management. And that's really what insurance is. You get coverage in exchange for payment.
Chris, what about if you're a small business owner? That's when, the personal life and commercial life get intermingled. A lot of people down in Houston right now are in that position, and they're dealing with some big business disruption losses. How do you think about that?
Well, I think on the business side, you obviously want to go back and look again at the coverage you have in place, but I think it also goes to the emergency fund. In business, you need retained earnings. You need money set aside in case of a rainy day fund, quote unquote. On the personal side, you need that in your life as well. 3 to 6 months of expenses set aside so when life does happen, you're able to take this emergency and turn it into an inconvenience.
I want to get your take on preparing for this. We want to point out that Hurricane Irma has now been upgraded to a Category 5 storm. So this is accelerating and worsening right now. Hurricane Irma now at a Category 5. Employees are wasting time at work worrying about money, Chris, and then their employers are paying for it. We've got this alarming new study from Mercer showing that workers spent roughly 150 hours annually worrying about finances at work, which cost companies up to $250 billion in lost wages last year. Your reaction?
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
I mean, if you start to think about that, $250 billion, and this is people concerned about money, so they're not focused on their job. Imagine if this is a healthcare professional or someone that's going to be doing surgery on you. I mean, this is alarming. And so it's one of those things where I think as employers, we need to make sure our employees understand, hey, you've got to have a plan for money. A lot of people think they need more money, but Maria, the reality is they're outliving their money. It's lifestyle, things that they can pull back that they have control over that would really relieve some of that pressure. Getting out of debt, having an emergency fund, and budgeting.
How many people outlive their money? A majority of people outlive their money,
I mean, 78% of people are living paycheck to paycheck.
Right,
that means if a check doesn't show up, they have now a life problem.
But also this probably has a lot to do with wages stagnating, basically. I mean, it's been years since we've seen really, a real significant uptick in wages. And then obviously, but the economy is doing great. So, people want to live their lives. They want to get out and spend. That fuels economic growth. So where's the balance? What would you suggest be the first thing that a family looking at their budget starts to cut back on?
Well, I think it's understanding the difference between a want and a need. I mean, if you know, I mean, that's an adult type thing, right? Because people get those confused all the time, and I think
iPhone?
If we do that, I mean, it really.
What's a want and what's a need?
Well,
For
I
the
think
average millennial out there,
sure.
what
A need is your housing, transportation, food, and clothing. We call that the 4 walls. Those are things that you need.
But we want so much more.
We do, Maria. And listen, there's nothing wrong with getting some stuff. Just don't let stuff have you. And what I mean by that is don't get it using debt where you're making a payment.
So, Chris, I have these millennials in my classroom, and I'm looking at them and their ability to manage their money. It seems to me that young people today are not getting an education in financial planning at the high school level, at the collegiate level. I mean, do you see that as a big problem?
I think it's a really big problem, just because also with a cashless society, they're not used to using cash. They have all these apps and all this, so money is not real. It's this ethereal thing. And so you can't manage something you're not aware of. And so I think it's really important for them to get that education from their parents, first and foremost, right, but also in schools, to be able to give them a life skill that they're going to need for the rest of their life.
But didn't a lot of them learn some hard lessons about debt and money because they were the ones who lived through the financial crisis? They had the hard, they worked up all this debt and then had to, you know, go into this really difficult job market. It seems like there's a lot of millennials out there who are kind of like my grandmother's generation who lived through the Depression, and they're like, I'm not gonna get myself in debt anymore.
Yeah, I would hope, and I'd love to see more. But the problem is we tend to get amnesia, right? We forget things. We forget the tough times and those lessons, and that's why we're doomed to repeat them. And so that credit card debt is dangerous. It's one of those things that will choke you out.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting with the millennial trends, they are the biggest savers of cash generationally as you look at this. And also, they're not so tied to pursuing a job just for wealth accumulation. They're more about pursuing jobs for meaning, which I think bodes well for their ability to discern between those wants and needs.
But as John said, they're also the generation that's been asking for debt forgiveness for college loans, too. They want an easy way out. That's what bothers them.
And they think free college is attainable.
In fairness to them, $50,000, $60,000 a year for college is not something a lot of us had to experience.
You don't learn the
But they
lesson
think that it should be free.
Well, that's another story completely. We don't have Bernie Sanders as president, so.
And $60,000, $250,000 a year to just get yourself through college.
Right.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about that, and you start to think college isn't something you have to do. College is something you get to do. But there are so many ways you can do it without taking on $50,000 or $60,000 in debt.
Yeah, good point. Chris, great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
so much. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Chris Hogan there. Still